Welcome to Dynamics Mechanics, Episode 9, Dynamics in Power Platform Future Predictions. Thank you for joining me on the Dynamics Mechanics podcast. I'm your host, Stephen Smith, the Dynamics Mechanic. This is the Dynamics 365 Strategy Podcast, where we discuss implementing software systems using the Microsoft Business Applications Platform. It's where I give you the strategies and teach you the techniques I learned in my experience as a delivery architect at Microsoft.
This episode is brought to you by KingswaySoft. KingswaySoft is a leading integration solution provider offering software solutions that make data integrations affordable and painlessly easy. Thousands of enterprise clients from over 80 countries and regions rely on KingswaySoft to integrate data with various business systems in order to drive their business efficiency and fully leverage their information assets. And KingswaySoft now fully works with CDS and Power Apps. So, Stephen, I see you have your crystal ball with you. What do you do with that thing?
Crystal ball? What?
Yeah, for your prediction.
Oh, my predictions, yes. So today we are going to be talking about future predictions of the Dynamics in Power platform. And of course, I'm here with Joel Lindstrom, who will be assisting me in augmenting my predictions with reality of things I get wrong. So for Power Apps, and unfortunately, this is already coming to pass, but it was on my list. The line between model and canvas apps will go away.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's a great thing. And you kind of felt that was probably coming, when they announced model-driven apps versus canvas apps. You kind of felt like, it would be pretty nice if these two things were, one thing. And clearly, that was obviously what Microsoft was thinking as well.
Yeah, and I think a couple things there. The Power Apps control framework, I think, means with the promise to be able to develop custom controls to basically replace the standard stuff. Because for years it was, we provide the plumbing, meaning the framework for the views, the dashboards, the forms. You add whatever fields you want, whatever relationships you want very quickly, add JavaScript, form script, business rules, etc. But you had to stay inside those lanes. Where now with the Power Apps control framework, you can go outside those lines and have new kinds of controls, and you don't like that view control, replace it with some other type of control that works better, and have that then with the embedded canvas apps, opening up the door to use all these connectors that we have totally changes a lot of the integration stories. Like I was looking at doing a integration with Jira, and in the past we would have dumped Jira data into it or maybe done a virtual entity, where now the answer is there's a Jira connector for Power Apps. Let's do a Canvas app, embed it in there and go. And so you're right, that's just the first step, where those controls being ubiquitous and you just choose what controls you want. The reusability of the controls between apps even goes further. So I agree that the story is going to change in a big way, and it's not going to be this two separate things, but it's going to be application platform chooses the best controls and the experience for users.
Yeah, and even as that control framework expands through, third-party vendors, that's going to be a pretty rich set of things that can be utilized on projects. So,
right,
it's only going to get better. My next prediction, and I feel pretty confident about this. The existing Dynamics mobile app will go away and be replaced by industry-specific or third-party customizable industry template Power Apps.
I would modify that a little bit. I think what we're going to see is we'll still have an app launcher. Okay, because the idea is I don't want to have to go through the approval process to get all these different apps in the Google Play or iOS App Store. And I can't, there's no realistic way for me to push an app. I guess it's easier to sideload things on Android than iOS, but basically you need that launcher to provide a rich mobile experience.
But the app will be more industry specific still through the Power App Launcher.
Well, you've already got that, because with your model driven apps, you can create industry specific apps.
Yeah, I guess what the prediction really is that mobile app as it is today will become a Power App instead of its own little
they will have a unified launcher,
Yeah.
whether it's a Power App. And already, if you go to your in the browser and hit the drop down, you see both the model driven and Canvas apps there together. So it makes sense that you'd have one, because really, realistically, today somebody could license CDS and Power Apps, do model-driven Power Apps without Dynamics licensing. And it's really probably confusing for them to have to go download a mobile app called Dynamics 365 if they want to use their model-driven app. So yeah, I would agree. I agree with you. And we know that offline is coming back, for example. So that's a fair prediction. I would agree with that.
Okay. One for me. All right.
I agree with both your predictions right now.
Okay.
You got to have something controversial here
So let's see.
Can argue against.
Power Apps will have the capability of submission as a standalone app in the Apple and Google Play stores.
Maybe. I think an external facing Power App or a way to take that app and then make it a app that you can sell. I agree.
I actually should have mentioned the next prediction before that one, which is Power Apps will become a customer-facing interface.
Well, okay, we know that the team was realigned a few months ago to put the people that do portals underneath the Power Apps group. And so with that move, there's an external story brewing there and a synergy between portals and Power Apps coming. Okay. It's just, there's no easy way to have something that I want all my customers to use. Unless I add them all as guests on my Office 365 and give them all licenses for Power Apps, there's not a real easy way to do that.
Right. And that's where, I think being able to build a separate standalone Power App that can then be published on those stores would be, with a different licensing perhaps.
I'm with you there.
And then that could tie into your app ecosystem that you've built on, Dynamics or Azure or whatever.
Or a way to take that and somehow get it into Xamarin or something.
Right. Yep. And my other kind of thought is perhaps Microsoft might kind of smooth the path to the app submission as far as, having to go through all the legwork separately with Apple, separately with Google Play. Maybe they might create some kind of orchestration service or something that allows customers to do that.
Right. And I think the nice thing about the path they've taken is it's more of a controlled experience for internal business apps. It's allowed them to get really deep functionality. And if you compared it to the Dynamics lifecycle, they jump from, say, CRM version 3 to CRM 2015 in about 6 months, and it's accelerating that way. I still think there's some usability from a Canvas app perspective that is just the way the expressions work is just a little bit intimidating for some some people who aren't Excel formula writers. Right. But so they're making improvements there and making it easier to do certain things. I mean, I noticed, like, I spoke at Ignite and I reopened the app that I did there and went back to add some more lookup fields and option sets, and it was much easier just in that time of really less than 6 months. Some nice usability things that just was more intuitive.
Okay. So we're going to move on to some integration predictions.
Okay.
So my first one is that someone will create a more rich connector for Azure Data Factory. So I was talking with Tim Hemmer the other day about Azure Data Factory, which is a great new addition to the integration story from Microsoft. But basically, think of it as SSS online or in the cloud with an on-prem connector that can operate on-prem as well. One of the challenges of that, the current service, is it does have over 70 connectors now, but the connector for Dynamics that is there apparently only handles some limited operations. So I'm assuming that means CRUD, but it doesn't really do much else. So a third-party vendor who operates in that space, someone like KingswaySoft may actually provide some. In fact, I don't know if Daniel has already talked about some things with Azure Data Factory, creating some more feature-rich connectors for data processing pipelines will definitely go a long way to helping Azure Data Factory be adopted and used on future projects, in addition to or in conjunction with SSIS on-prem.
Yeah, I think it's interesting when I talk to customers and prospective customers, because if they have existing infrastructure and existing integrations running on-premise SSIS, then it's makes sense a lot of times to put your Dynamics integrations there too, so you can manage them and orchestrate them together. The interesting about the Azure Data Factory is another option for, say, partners and even Microsoft to prepackage some integrations. So like if you have a cloud service, or some customers use a cloud service, and you can deliver an end-to-end solution that integrates to that totally in the cloud without any stand up any servers, that's valuable. But it's interesting to see, parallel that with some other things. For example, I'm hearing good things about the import utility for CDS.
Okay.
And there's a way to schedule that to run on a regular basis, as well as of course Canvas apps and Power Apps if we're going to a connector world rather than a data integration world. So there's just a lot of moving pieces there.
Yes, there is. It's getting interesting. So here's my next prediction, a little more advanced stuff.
Okay.
Microsoft platforms will build native integrations with Azure Event Grid, allowing for event-driven architecture patterns and event-driven Azure Data Factory pipeline executions. So that's probably a little over a lot of people's normal things they think about. But basically, the reason this is interesting and exciting to me is it, at least at my first glance of Azure Data Factory, it is a nicer experience for creating integration pipelines it's visual, right?
Right.
I mean, SSIS is still visual, but this just is like a modern kind of style SSIS development platform. And to be able to create pipelines that can then be, for example, executed when a lead is created, for example. It's off system, so it's event driven. So you can, for example, set up an event where some business event of importance fires off. It sends a message to Event Grid, and then any number of other applications can be listening. Event Grid is a push platform. It's not, so there's 3 different messaging platforms that Azure offers today. There's Azure Service Bus, there's Event Grid, and then there's Event Hubs, right? So Event Hubs is more for like ingestion of high volume events. So that's something that you would probably use in some kind of like IoT situation or field service where you're gathering telemetry from instruments and you're ingesting those at a very high pace. Whereas Event Grid is more geared towards integration, where loosely coupled integration, where you're pushing out events from different systems, and then other systems can then listen in on those events and then perform some operation that isn't specifically known to the source system.
So is there any kind of working together with Event Grid and Logic Apps or Flow?
Yeah, same thing. So a Logic app could listen to an Event Grid event or topic.
Theoretically, you could use this now if you wanted to, because you could have your Logic app listening to Event Grid and then triggering a Logic app with Dynamics to do something.
I think the challenge right now is you have to make an intermediate hop between Dynamics and Event Grid. I'm not sure. I have to look.
Okay.
I don't know that there is a connect. Like, so right now you can set up basically a plugin that fires off a message to Azure Service Bus, but I don't know that you can actually send a message to Event Grid yet. So you may have to actually have a listener, like a function, listen on an Azure Service Bus queue, and then basically proxy that over to Event Grid. And then what the prediction is here is, since Azure Data Factory, they decided to go ahead and make that be able to execute on demand from listening to Azure Event Grids. And it looks like Microsoft in general is setting up Azure Event Grid to be that kind of pub sub portal for integration, so that you can create those loosely coupled integration scenarios where you have other systems that just they're interested in certain events from other systems, but that source system, you don't want to tightly couple every single other system to, otherwise, you change one thing in another system and everything breaks, right? When you have those tightly coupled integration patterns. So this is one way to create a loosely coupled integration pattern where, for example, maybe there's a sale of a product on your website, and then that triggers, finance to do something, or triggers the warehouse to go and pack that item up, and shipping and all that. So you don't necessarily want the sales system, for example, to know explicitly what's going on in the accounting department, what's going on in the warehouse, those systems should be operating kind of in a more anonymous way. And that also allows for greater scalability. But anyway, I think if it's not there, I could be wrong, but I think that'll be coming up in the future.
Yeah, that makes sense, but I'll take your word for it because I don't know anything about that.
Things I think about at night. So coming down to my last set of predictions, and this is more dynamics focused and maybe more controversial than some of my other more modest predictions. So I believe, and this is purely prediction, I don't know this for a fact, I believe that at some point the product team will replace SQL Server or Azure SQL as the data platform to Cosmos DB.
I'll go one farther. I think there's already pieces running in Cosmos DB.
Oh, there could be. I'm sure
I don't know that to be true, but you look at some, for example, when you spin up a new instance, that happens very quickly, and there's other things or other certain components, and there's probably some of the things in all the, add in all the admin centers and the org insights and some of those metrics that can be seen through some of these Microsoft admin centers that you can't see through other places, or the new Office auditing stuff. There's stuff besides the relational database going on.
I wouldn't be surprised, but I think the actual data store for Dynamics itself will switch to Cosmos DB at some point. And it's interesting because it opens up a lot of different scenarios, right? Now, the thing is, for example, with Wells Fargo going down, right? I'm sure
a lot of hay out of this Wells Fargo.
I really have a thing for Wells Fargo going down that irritates me to no end. In fact, I'm writing a podcast just about that. But with their data center going down and the entire bank across the country falling to pieces, it clearly shows a non-distributed architecture pattern that they've been using that creates a single point of failure, right? And even if your systems are highly available, and some of you may have seen my little post I posted not too long ago when Wells Fargo news started coming out that they were down, is that just because your system may be highly available within your data center, there's nothing like a good backhoe to take out your internet connection to that data center, or how about a fire somewhere that creates an automated shutdown of the entire data center, so they say, and your whole system's gone, right? In this modern day, now granted, this is a legacy style architecture that a lot of executive management has a hard time finding a way to justify the expense of replacing, and it's something that happens over time. But when you look at the Wells Fargo situation, you clearly see what the potential impacts can be when, for example, you run a bank out of one data center, like the whole country, the whole data center went down. I went into Wells Fargo the same day to create a bank account, and the lady said, "Sorry, can't help you." In fact, people weren't getting paychecks. You couldn't send money. You couldn't get money out of the ATM.
Wow.
You would think someone over there at Wells Fargo was probably sitting on his couch eating popcorn saying, "Wow, it took that long to happen." I'm sure someone knew about it, but the powers that be decided that they weren't willing to, or they didn't have the budget to make the change. But this is where we come into kind of the modern age of distributed architecture patterns where, for example, right, if a backhoe takes out a certain ISP, that doesn't take down the whole internet, right? Like people in Australia still have internet because the internet is distributed, right? It's not, you can't point at one place and say, oh, there's the internet right there. And your kind of critical line of business application should be the same way, in that, with Azure and all the data centers that Microsoft supports, a modern application is built in a more distributed manner to where, for example, for Wells Fargo, just because that one data center went down, the whole country should not have gone down. Maybe a region, maybe a state, but not the entire bank across the country. And
Microsoft has redundancy in data centers, but you don't have true distributed environments. You can't have your environment, people hitting different data centers and updating the same instance. Your instance is in one data center.
In this particular case, because here's the thing with banking, right? You need to go with consistency over partitioning, right? Because the balance in your bank account can't be multiple different balances at any one time.
Right.
If you only have $10 and then someone takes out, $50 and then someone says, okay, let me add 20, those have to happen in sequence and they have to be consistent. So the actual architecture strategy for a Wells Fargo is to go with a partitioning strategy, a distributed partition. So for example, maybe all the people in the Southeast run off of a separate instance of the system, and then someone else in the West Coast run off a separate instance. Now, that's not to say that, if one of those data centers goes down, it doesn't take down the entire system. It takes down part of it.
So are you predicting that Dynamics and CDS will go to more of a multi data center type?
I think what the Cosmos DB play adds is the ability to partition automatically to other data centers. Right. So it depends on the scenario, though.
And I think this is one of the things, and again, this is me speculating. This isn't me with any inside knowledge, but I think this is one of the reasons for getting everybody on the same version.
Yes.
Because if you had everybody on 3, 4, 5 different versions, you can't really do that effectively. Where now that everybody is moving in the same way, there's consistency, less need of different versions of installations and Windows and everything, and the ability to have one platform. I guess kind of like Office. I mean, I guess you still have a region for your SharePoint and OneDrive and whatever, but it's not like your Office 365. You necessarily worry about what data center it's in.
Right. And it doesn't work for every single scenario, but with the configurable consistency levels of Azure Cosmos DB, you could, in theory, configure multiple instances. For example, for those customers that have a geo-distributed user base, maybe I do want to configure my system to run in the US, Europe, and the Asia, for example. And it depends on the system and what the requirements are, but it just opens up a lot of interesting things. For example, even too, with NoSQL, with the flexible data model, as you change things in a relational database, then that model changes for everything for all time. Whereas with Cosmos DB, if you were to change the data model, and it depends on if this is a desirable attribute or not, maybe you change some of the fields for this year, let's say, and then you change them again next year, or you add some more, or you take away some. It doesn't change the historical account of what those records were. So, and that's what you lose right now with a relational database design.
You also have the limit of 4 terabytes currently. Right. And so now that we're in CDS land, not CRM town, and people are building theoretically hundreds of different apps running on the same data source, it's going to grow the size of the databases. And so as a result, I'm agreeing with you on that one. So again, okay. I haven't got to fight with you about anything on this.
Okay. Well,
I mean, anything controversial?
Okay, we'll save the last one for the controversial. So my next one is that Dynamics async service and plugins will be replaced to run on Azure Service Bus and Azure Functions. So when you create a plugin, for example, now it may be orchestrated. I'm not saying you're going to create one directly in Azure Functions, but they will be run as Azure Functions and use Azure Service Bus as the queuing mechanism instead of a database table like it is today.
Yeah, I could see that. And I mean, the minute you get all the workflows into Flow, which all the asynchronous ones, which use the asynchronous processing service, and I guess background plugins would be the other, asynchronous plugins would be the other use case. Then you got a bunch of miscellaneous things like certain aspects of server-side sync. Use that, certain things that run asynchronously, but they're starting to move system jobs over to Flow rather than workflow. So I'm with you on that too.
Okay.
Or do you still need an asynchronous pipeline like that? If you got the workflows and system jobs moved over to Flow, then it's just whatever other core system processes.
I speculate if maybe they might let system jobs maybe still stay in the database, but everything else is moved out. They may move everything. And that kind of makes sense. If it's an async job, a database table, a locking relational database table is the most horrible thing you could use as a queue. So it does make sense to move over to an Azure Service Bus queue. And especially considering in high load scenarios, you can even have parallel queues running to absorb that kind of load. So it really helps with the scalability, and it takes the pressure off the database to handle a single database table with, potentially, millions it can get up to in high volume scenarios of rows just for async jobs. And then you've got these competing async servers, which is another anti-pattern that I've been complaining about for years, finally can get fixed with a little Azure magic. So that is one of my predictions. Here's another one.
So that's a perfect example. Is if Microsoft decided to do that with D365 Online, what's to say they're not already doing something like that?
They might be.
You can't see the service.
Well, I say they're not only because I can go look at the async operation table and see.
That's true.
That. So I would say if it happens, that part of it will be a little bit different, and we'll have to figure out how we monitor jobs, because that's part of it too. I know they're changing the way logging and tracing works in the system, but that will have to be addressed as well when they move to Azure Service Bus. On the next prediction is that, and this I'm sure Mr. Gus Gonzalez will love this, is Gus believes that Dynamics on-prem should just go away, right?
Right.
And while I have a small sentiment for what he's saying, I think it's a little over the top to just say get rid of it. It's very challenging, and even I can't really fully appreciate the challenges of a product team supporting multiple versions of a platform across, online and on-prem, and all the customer politics that go along with it. So to just say, just get rid of it and chuck it, it sounds easier than it actually is. I'm sure. Granted, I'm sure they would love to say, let's get rid of on-prem, but it's not quite that easy.
It's interesting in the release notes. There's on-premise aspects for everything in the release notes except for customer engagement. And it's interesting because Microsoft, for example, can't do a cloud-only POS solution because in a store, if you lose internet connection, you still have to be able to sell something.
Yes.
Okay. So with that in mind, and the fact that even platforms that started cloud-only like Power BI have come out with on-premise components.
Right.
And you've got local gateways for Power Platform connectors and things like that. I still think the vision is a true hybrid type thing where you've got you've got something that can be run locally but leverages cloud services like Azure in some way.
Right. And that actually gets me to my next prediction.
Okay.
Is that on-prem won't necessarily go away. It will be replaced by Azure Stack. So here's why I say that. In this journey that Dynamics has been on, slowly but surely, all of the legacy features are being basically transformed into an Azure type service, right? And that even includes new features like machine learning that's added on there and everything. But as it continues, I believe the platform will totally be Azure, right? At some point. Like even the front ends will be Azure Web Services. All the async jobs will be run from Azure Queues. The database may be Cosmos DB. At least it's going to be Azure SQL. Everything will be an Azure service, right? And once you get to that point, you have these Azure Stack appliances that a customer can buy, and they simply buy the hardware, they slap it in their local data center, and they can literally run Azure right there. So if Dynamics is a fully Azure-esque service, they will be able to run Dynamics on-prem using an Azure Stack appliance. And that also helps with the POS sample, because if, for example, let's say this equipment is affordable,
right,
that someone can buy an Azure Stack set of appliances, stick it in their local store, and they're running Azure right there, but it's configurable to where, for example, they could have failover to where if that Azure Stack goes away, all those services transfer up to the closest data center, and they're running from there, so people don't just lose connectivity.
So it's interesting because Azure Stack is kind of under Microsoft 365, right? And in a Satya Nadella keynote earlier this year, it was after Christmas, he kind of talked as if Office 365 and Microsoft 365 were kind of coming together. So what that means, I don't know. But that's kind of the vision I had, because there are legitimate reasons for on premises, and there are cases where in most cases the cloud is a great fit, but you bring up a coal mine or some place where they don't have constant connectivity.
Right.
You have to have, in some cases, on premise. Those are getting further and farther between right now. But yeah, I would agree. I think some kind of a true hybrid where you have one platform, but you have components of that can be run on premises is a good thing.
Yeah. So I think that's where we're going. I don't think we're getting rid of on-prem. I think we're just transforming it
right
to something else that is cloud, but just running on-prem.
Right. And I think we're really kind of at a bifurcation point where, the people who use CRM and still say CRM and are on premises today, they're a different market than the business applications platform world. And that Power Apps flow, that's online only. And that's getting bigger and bigger and better and richer, where you've got this subset of functionality that legacy systems need to use on premises. So that's the balancing act. And I talk to very few people who say we need to be on premise and want to be there 5 years from now. Most of the ones I talk to who are now on premise and there for now have a vision to get to the cloud.
Right. Yeah.
And that's where I think we'll increasingly go that way. But there still is having the ability to run certain pieces of these locally is a good thing.
And I think the Azure Stack is also a good competitive play for VMware, which it has been a competitor for a while in the virtualization space, and they have their own cloud. But when you can just run everything either in the cloud or locally on the same platform, it's kind of hard to beat that.
Right.
I think that will happen. My next prediction is kind of based on that. As Dynamics becomes consumed by Azure services, you will eventually get to the point where you can configure the different aspects of your system on an individual basis. So that includes performance, that includes scalability, global distribution, and network isolation. So, for example, you like today, if you wanted to run on-prem, you have to go install the on-prem, installation and all that stuff. And you can even do that in the cloud, but you're still running on-prem. You're not running online. I think at some point, as this becomes Azure-esque, customers may have the option to deploy an instance in let's say a private VNet in Azure that is only accessible, say, from a certain data center or something like that. I think it provides more options, but also from the scalability standpoint, maybe you have scalability needs that are exceeding what you have today. Now, granted, you can still put in a support ticket and ask for more resources and all that, but I think at some point Dynamics will run like an Azure service where you just slide a dial and say, okay, I want this level of service or performance for this particular instance, and that'll be configurable, and you just pay based on the level of performance that you want.
Maybe, but
maybe.
I think
it's possible.
There's differences between a development platform like Azure and a business application platform, because generally business application platform is driven by the business, where technology platform is driven by the IT department, for example. So when you're leveraging Azure and scaling up the DTUs on your VM or whatever, that's a very technical thing, and the majority of Dynamics or business application customers aren't down in the weeds quite that. They might have somebody who is, and there might be some super admin ability to do that and pay more as you do that, as we get more capacity based. That makes sense. And Microsoft is setting up, like seeing how the when we're in Azure SQL and V9, how it is throttled at the database level. And so sometimes you do have to, like you've written about recently, you've got to call Microsoft and get them to raise the scale group or whatever. So yeah, I think they will, more controls over that would be nice, but I don't think it's going to be, I don't think most customers want to work with it that way. I think they want it to be just kind of seamless. And also, I don't see that with, I think Salesforce has different plans, like where you can pay more to get more capacity, but it's not like a dial you inch up or inch down, but I think that as we talk about CDS capacity, I think there's some things architecturally wise and that have to change to get there. But yeah, I think that would, I'm not disagreeing with you, but I think most customers wouldn't. It's the very large ones or the niche ones. It would be, yes. The ones that have, like a small number of users that run really complex processes. Because right now I think there's some kind of math that goes on, or algorithm that says based on the number of users and amount of data that they should be in this scale group, and some people's activity puts them outside that. And I know that you can, if you're in one of those edge cases, you can call Microsoft and negotiate to pay them more to get more compute power. But it's not published in any price list. The price list is already hundreds of pages long. Can you imagine, if you add in that a factor of, you have this license and this number of users and you want X number of DTUs, that would make it now 500 pages long.
Well, and part of the rationale for this is the whole noisy neighbor problem, right? I can admit that I have taken down a scale group. Not that it was me personally, but somebody.
I think you told that story.
Yeah, I told that story before. But it's possible, right? So, I mean, if you're running a critical application, you don't want Bob, the noisy neighbor, to take you down because he decided to import 4 million records and have about a dozen async workflows running.
I mean, that's the thing is right now you can pay Microsoft to have a dedicated instance, and you can buy express route so you're not going over public internet. It's really expensive though, so nobody does it.
Yeah, express route is crazy expensive. You really need to have a a more significant reason to use ExpressRoute than just Dynamics, because you're talking like the last price I saw was like the cheapest was like $65,000 a year.
And a lot of that's not even going to Microsoft. It's going to the
it's going to the
ISP
or ISP. And it kind of goes up from there because you can then select what kind of bandwidth you want. And I think that was like the cheapest bandwidth that you could buy. So ExpressRoute, great option if you have the significant need to use it. For example, with the infrastructure team at one of my customers, they were the kind of the lead proponents of ExpressRoute because they wanted to use Azure Backup. And to try to pipe that much data over their regular internet connection didn't make any sense, and it wasn't even feasible. So
yeah, common thread is the IT group wants it, the business group shoots it down because it's really expensive.
Yeah. You have to have almost like this concert of people that are all saying, yeah, let's do this. But that typically requires a lot of the organization to be aware of what the Azure capabilities are and actually want to use them. So right. I've not been successful in Azure ever acquiring an ExpressRoute, at least from a Dynamics perspective. But the security teams are definitely interested in it just from the fact that they don't like, all the traffic going over the open internet. Even if it is encrypted, they kind of like the back channel that's over a private network. So
right, and that makes me wonder, like the infrastructure type stuff you're talking about. What really drives Microsoft to make investments in that? I think what sells the software is the functionality and the user experience, not so much the infrastructure stuff. But as Microsoft can do things to make improvements, a lot of these things you're mentioning, like the Cosmos DB and things like that, would have benefits to Microsoft as well that then would show to their customers. But I don't think, and I think the distributed nature that would help them win some large deals for large enterprise customers.
I mean, just the nature of if you have a globally distributed user base, one instance is probably not going to cut it depending on what you're doing. I've never heard of any global customer having a great experience with a single instance running. So that's where that Cosmos DB comes in. But I think as far as the infrastructure side of it, that doesn't sell the software, but it does maybe put a plug in the naysayers who maybe have some issue with how it's implemented. So because they have options to go with like an ExpressRoute or even a site-to-site VPN to Dynamics that can kind of quell the at least the security concerns. But I mean, there is limitations with even site-to-site VPN. So ExpressRoute is a great option if you have the money. And my last prediction here is that, and I'm sure Joel is going to totally disagree with me, Dynamics will replace Salesforce as the number one CRM within 24 months.
The whole thing about who's the number one CRM is totally bogus.
Well, hey.
Because it just depends on how you slice it. So you've been in the Atlanta airport and seen that graph that shows Salesforce going up and everybody else down here.
We'll say Gartner. Gartner will rate Dynamics number one over Salesforce.
Well, we're already in the leader quadrant. So
we're in the quadrant, but we're not.
In some areas we're higher, in some areas we're lower. And so again, that maybe not. I think we've moved beyond the quote unquote CRM.
Well, that's true.
Because when you count CDS, when you count field service, when you count Power Apps, we're ahead from the, Salesforce just came out with their version of Power Apps, right. And it's not nearly as good from an AI standpoint. I mean, Paul Greenberg was on in his rundown was raving about the AI features in Dynamics or in Microsoft Business Applications. I do think Salesforce has better branding around some of this
totally.
Stuff because Microsoft has cognitive services and machine learning for years. They just didn't give it a brand like Salesforce did with Einstein. And finally, we have this Dynamics AI for whatever, and have something that's really exciting and leverages some competitive advantages around Exchange. So, yeah, I'm with you. Depends on how you slice it, though. We're already leading. in multiple areas. There's some areas Salesforce does better though. I think if you limit it to the pure Salesforce automation, marketing, and customer service, arguably Salesforce is ahead of us. I mean, from a numbers perspective, they are. Yeah. When you count things like, add in things like field service and AI and other things like that, and the whole CDS and the fact that CDS for apps has connectors to Salesforce and the ability to build apps on top of Salesforce, and also has for the AI for customer service has import templates, understands the Salesforce schema for customer service analytics. I almost don't care about Salesforce versus Dynamics anymore, because if you want to use Salesforce, you can still use the business applications platform and make it better, or tie together disparate groups that use Dynamics. And we're already seeing customers have a Dynamics group and a Salesforce group, and the Dynamics group is starting to write Power Apps for the Salesforce group. It's
kind of like the Borg strategy, huh?
Yeah,
assimilate them.
And if you add in all the Salesforce people that use Power BI, it seems like a lot of them, or many if not most of them, do now. So it's such a porous world now where it's the Power BI is part of the Power Platform, and you can embed a Canvas app in this. Here's the mind-blowing thing now is that I can have Salesforce and have the data from Salesforce integrating through standard integration templates with CDS, build model-driven apps on top of that, or build Power apps that embed in a Salesforce Power BI dashboard. It just Microsoft's strategy is winning.
Oh yes.
And Salesforce that doesn't mean Salesforce has to lose. Salesforce can continue to be successful. It's just you talk to the IT group, they're standardized on Microsoft, and it's just I'm sure there's still going to be back and forth and steal features from each other. I think I saw that Salesforce was the first to use the term Canvas app, but it was meant something different. But so they both borrow heavily from each other.
I won't feel too bad if Salesforce goes down in flames one day, but they used to certainly beat the pants off of us back in the day.
Yeah,
and they certainly, like you said, their marketing. Okay, whoever's the head of marketing, Microsoft needs to steal those guys. Now, not to say that our marketing in the current time hasn't been a lot better, but back in the day, like I was on a plane one time when Windows 8 was coming out, and like there was supposed to be this big to-do, and absolutely no one heard of Windows 8. Now, you might say that maybe that's a good thing, but it was just our marketing it hasn't been great in the past. It's better now. But I think still Salesforce has a better marketing message that is effective. And, they certainly spend a lot of money on celebrities at their Salesforce conference. But
we don't want to steal the chief officer of the Salesforce marketing.
Well, no.
That's Bob Stutz.
Oh, no, never mind.
And we all know what happened
Bob,
when he was in charge of that.
Anyway. I won't say too much about
How are his acquisitions doing?
I don't know.
They all failed and went away.
Oh, such a surprise. Oh, well, that's what you get, Bob, for leaving us.
Those are good predictions. And, again, I don't disagree with them. I think I would agree with most of them, quibble with a few of your details, but, those are pretty safe.
Yes. I think those were pretty safe predictions. I didn't go crazy. I could have went, really crazy, but no, those are just things that I kind of foresaw in the future, just based on where things were and where things seem to be going now.
Yeah, so the takeaway is, whether these things happen or not, the key takeaway is the Power Platform is driving a lot of this.
Yeah,
and if you're ignoring that, it's at your peril.
Yes.
And it's not the same world. If you work for a company that uses Dynamics, or you work as a Dynamics partner, just being comfortable with your little world of Salesforce automation and marketing and case management is not is not where we're going. It's important, but it's a much bigger world and much more things you can do with it. So good predictions.
Yes. All right. Thank you. And I hope all of my predictions come true. And if not, then...
I noticed you didn't put a time frame on any of them.
Oh, well, that makes it a little bit easier. Yes.
So 10 years from now, if we're still
10
up
years
there,
from
you
now.
can say it's coming.
CRM 3000. Okay.
All right.
Thanks. Hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Dynamics Mechanics Podcast. Feel free to reach out and connect with me on social media. You can find me on Twitter at Stephen Smith CRM, and that's STEPHAN. You can also find me on LinkedIn at Stephen Smith CRM as well. And feel free to check out my website, and that's dynamicsmechanics.com. Thank you.